It's kind of a funny title. All of us, I'm sure, are involved in music ministry or have been involved in music ministry or will be, or involved in ministry, even if it's not music. And you know that when you're involved in ministry, sometimes it's not pain-free. It's there's spiritual burdens, there's spiritual warfare, there's conflicts, there's all sorts of things that as ministers we work through. But there's one area of our ministry that should be pain-free, and that's when we sit at the piano. And that's kind of where I come up with the title for this. Since you've taken the time to come and listen to me go through my spiel here, I'm assuming that all of you, have either maybe experienced some pain, are experiencing some pain, afraid you might experience pain and want to avoid it, or know someone that has experienced some pain. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is ways to avoid pain when we play. I do want to start out the session by telling you briefly about my story. I have 3 degrees in the piano. I have an undergraduate degree and then a master's, and then I went ahead and finished the doctorate. It's really kind of too bad that I have 3 degrees in piano, because piano is the last thing I do nowadays. I teach at a small school. We wear a lot of different hats. I hardly ever practice a lot. I'll tell my piano teacher. I'm a piano teacher, and a lot of my free time I spend writing and arranging. But I do teach every day, so I'm involved in teaching piano. I see a lot of students who come in with complaints. When I was starting my master's degree, at that time, the career, the future that I had laid out for myself, I was going to be a concert pianist. And I think every piano major that has ever lived has that dream, and you don't realize that there's only about 10 of those guys in the whole world. That's some pretty rare air that they're breathing. But that was my goal. And so I was practicing the obligatory 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And I came down with a hand injury from over-practice. It was right at the start of my degree. Actually, it wasn't from over-practice. That's not the correct way of saying it. It was an injury related to maybe not playing in a healthy way. If you play in a healthy way, you really can practice as much as you want to. Right? You're going to be okay. Well, I was about 22, I guess, because it was the start of my master's, maybe 22 or 23. And I came down with some very sharp pains right in the center of my wrist that really wouldn't go away. I hoped that they would go away with some rest. They never did. And I went to all the hand doctors, and it wasn't carpal tunnel. That's the kind of the first thing everyone thought it might be. They did the test, and it wasn't carpal tunnel. They said it was just a very bad strain, but it never healed. And I had a lot of symptoms of carpal tunnel, the severe pain and the tingling and all. But nonetheless, the machine, the test, said it was not carpal tunnel. Well, that started about, I was 22 or 23, and it started about a 10-year quest to take care of my hand. And, you go to see doctors, and even hand doctors, and unless you're a passionate pianist, and I'm assuming you guys are because you're here, you can't really quite explain to the doctor that angst that you're going through. You're going to doctors that are dealing with cancer and dealing with people with terminal life-threatening illnesses, and this is certainly not a terminal illness. There's a lot of people that are having worse than we pianists do who hurt. And so you can just imagine the doctors. I come back because of my hand pain, and they're thinking, "Kid, go away. I've got a guy with cancer here. You're complaining about a pain in your wrist. Go and just take an ibuprofen." Well, but to me it was like a nightmare. That you just can't wake up from, because the one thing I was passionate about, and the one thing that I saw me spending the rest of my life doing, all of a sudden was put in jeopardy. I was hurting so bad, I really thought I was going to stop. Well, there's some spiritual applications that I can take from that, which very briefly, I guess I could say, God allowed me to go through that injury for a couple of reasons, maybe 3 that I can think of. One was He was diverting me off from a path that maybe I wasn't quite right for. I'm a good pianist, but I'm not a concert pianist, and I might have been beating my head against a wall that just wasn't going to move, if I continued down that path. The other thing is that I am so passionate about writing and arranging and composing, and that injury is what set me off on that. I was thinking, gosh, I'm not going to be able to play the piano anymore, but I love music. I've always kind of dabbled in writing. If I can't play it, I'll write it. And it was a way I think God kind of swerved me into a direction that might be a better fit for me. And then the other thing is as my career as a teacher, I've had the opportunity to be able to help some folks and divert them from injury and maybe help them recover if they have been hurt. To make a long story short, and I won't go into this, but God put some people in my life who were some very intuitive teachers that helped me find some things in my playing mechanism that needed to be changed, and I made those corrections, and I'm absolutely pain-free. So these teachers did it for me, but God's the one that placed the teachers in my path. So it's just a blessing from Him that I can sit and play as much as I want and not hurt. I do think it's possible to play with pain and play with pain and play with pain to the point that you do cross a line where you're not really going to totally back out. Although even then, I think you can improve more than you can possibly imagine. But I never crossed that line of permanent injury. The first thing that I want to say, that was the introduction. For those of you that have been here with me this week, I love my handouts. Piano-related injuries are not a new thing. It seems like they are. And not just piano, but musician-related injuries. We hear about it all the time. There's performing arts medicine now, in our larger cities, maybe Dallas or Austin has some. I know there's some in New York and Boston. That wasn't even available for me, in the mid-90s when I was going through this. You just had to go to a hand up. Have you guys ever heard of Leon Fleischer? Right? Leon Fleischer and Gary Grafflin? Yeah. Well, the musical world, first started noticing playing-related injuries with those two gentlemen, two of the finest concert pianists that ever lived. The only problem is their career was cut short right as it was getting started. And both from playing-related injuries. Fleischer, I understand, he injured his right hand from a lady in the previous session. She said that he is now actually trying to play both hands together again. He teaches at Peabody, but he's probably gapping his 70s now. And his whole career, he's played left-handed repertoire. I don't think Gary Grafflin ever really has tried to play with his right hand again. But injuries go back even farther than that. I'm not going to read a lot of quotes to you because that's kind of boring for me to have in my head in a book. But have you ever heard of Claire Schumann? Robert's wife, right, the composer. We think of Robert as the composer and Clara as the great concert pianist, which she was. But in her diary, she says, throughout my entire stay in Copenhagen, I always had to tolerate grief and anxiety concerning my fingers, which were constantly inflamed from much playing. Right? Paderewski, heard of him? Great pianist. He says, I had become used to the constant and terrifying pain in my arm, and I had also learned to play with 4 fingers only of my right hand, and to adjust my will and nerves to the ordeal I felt, as did the physicians, that I might never play again. Rachmaninoff, I'm very tired and my hands hurt. Every extra hand movement tires me. My concert season has ended, and it is as if my hands have lost their feeling. The more I get tired, the more pain I have. This means that by the end of the concert season, the pain is almost constant. And then Glenn Gould, right? We all know Glenn Gould. In his diaries, he says that he noticed a very disturbing breakdown of control over my hands, as well as a lack of coordination during the last 2 decades of his life. So these things have been around, right? They're not new. They've been around. The third point there in your handout is a survey of ergonomic. There's a buzzword that everyone uses. Ergonomic. It's used almost so much I hate to use it. But a survey of ergonomic piano pedagogy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, really hardly at all, on this, because I did this session the other day, and I went through this, and it put the whole thing late, and I couldn't finish. And what you guys are really here for is the nuts and bolts of how you avoid injury, not a list of piano teachers. So I'm going to skip through this right now, but I do want to point out to you that all of the names that you see there, Ludwig Depp, Theodore Liszczycki, Rudolf Breithout, Tobias Mante, Otto Ortman, Arnold Schultz, Abby Whiteside, Dorothy Talbot, and Barbara Listerson. And that's just a small list. Those are all people who have tackled the issue of how he played the piano well. All of them have written books. Now, people like Rudolf Breithout, who was a German teacher who lived many 100 years ago, 150 years ago. A lot of these books now are translated, from the original language, so they're sometimes confusing to read and hard to understand. But they all have their ideas put forth in book form that you can still find and study and read about. The big thing about the one thing I will say in this section before we move on to 4, which is, I think, where we probably need to camp today. The one thing I will say is that piano pedagogy started to, how you teach piano and how the correct way to play the instrument became an issue in the early 18th century, in the early 1700s. At that time, the harpsichord was still the primary instrument, right? Has anyone ever played harpsichord? Right. Well, if you have, it has a very light action. In fact, if you play too hard, a lot of pianists wreak havoc on harpsichords because they play the harpsichord like a piano. It can't stand the weight and the velocity and the technique that we use for piano playing. Very light touch. You can almost blow on it to put the key down. Sorry, I shouldn't have those onions so much. When the piano, actually more specifically the piano forte, which was kind of the forerunner of the piano, when it started to evolve, the action was required a little bit more strength, right, to put down. And so pianists and piano teachers realized that the method they had been using of playing the harpsichord, which really was just fingers all by itself, was really no longer applicable to this new instrument. And they realized that something else has to be behind the fingers to help put the keys down. And all of piano pedagogy, Robert Spillman, who was my teacher on my doctorate degree, one of my teachers, summed it up by saying the whole entire gamut of piano pedagogy history is just an argument on what's the right amount of finger and arm and the coordination between those two to use when you're playing. You need a little more arm, you need a little more finger, you need a little less. That's it, right? Now, that's probably a gross oversimplification, right? Because there's other things that we use in addition to our fingers and arm, but in a lot of ways, Bob Spillman kind of hit the nail right on the head. The only pedagogues that I want to mention beyond that at all are the last two, Dorothy Talbot and Barbara Listerson. Has anyone ever heard of either of those two ladies? Okay, yeah. Have you? Are you a pianist? Are you a student here? Okay, yeah. The youngest guy in the room, so I was assuming you might be. Have you ever worked with any of those? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They, particularly Dorothy Talbot, is a bit of a controversial figure. But her whole career has been devoted to helping pianists either A, avoid injury, or B, back out of an injury, if an injury occurs. Barbara Listerson is the same way. Now, Dorothy Talbot is now in her 80s. And her protege, who now is in her late 50s, a lady named Edna Golansky, really continues on Dorothy's teaching and her methodology and her legacy. They have something every year called the Golansky Institute. I think it's at Williams College in Williams, Massachusetts. And pianists that are injured fly out there, and we spend a week, kind of like the Alleluia conference here, but the whole thing is just a conference devoted to helping injured pianists recover. And you get to work with Talbot teachers. Barbara Listerson does the same thing. Okay, she lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I have worked with both Talbot teachers and with Barbara Listerson. So the thoughts that I put forth probably have a little bit of its genesis from the Talbot School, and I'll give credit, where that's due when I talk about some of the things they mentioned, and then from Barbara Listerson also. I do want to point out that as we kind of go through some of this, I'm not a Talbot teacher, I'm not a Barbara Listerson teacher. I've worked with both of those people, but when people decide to study the Talbot approach, there's an entire certification program that people spend years going through. I think that the Talbot Institute must have had a problem a few years ago because people would come in and fly in and take a lesson or two with a Talbot teacher, and then they go back home and hang out a shingle that says they're a Talbot teacher. And they may or may not be really representing the principles of the Talbot school accurately. And the same thing with Barbara Listerson. So I want to say that I'm neither one of those. You know, I'm drawing things that I teach from both of those schools, and some from things I just discovered with my injury, and some from working with my students. But I don't want you to leave thinking you've had a lesson with someone that's really associated with any one school of thought, because that's not the case. Okay, let's look at number 4, healthy piano playing. Some things we need to know. I'm moving along a lot quicker than I did the other day. How an injury occurs. How does an injury occur? Does anyone know? Stress. And more specifically, what is stressed?
Muscle? Your nerves? Or muscles?
Not even nerves, not even muscles. Most piano injuries happen with the tendons. Tendons are involved. You know, do we know what tendons do, right? They connect muscles, right? For instance, the muscles that move my fingers are actually not in the hand, as I'm sure you guys know. They're in the forearm, right? But the tendons connect those muscles to the digits that those muscles move, right? They're called tendons. Tendons are very strong, right? They're not very elastic. Most of the time they're enclosed in sheaths, right, for protection. Those sheaths secrete fluid, right, to kind of keep the tendons themselves lubricated. And most injuries occur when the tendons become stressed, and then they become inflamed, right? And then if there's inflammation there, more fluid is secreted from the sheaths, and that causes swelling, right? Most injuries happen to the tendons. In fact, you know, that's where tendinitis and carpal tunnel, that's where carpal tunnel comes from. Has anyone ever had carpal tunnel? Do you know how carpal tunnel occurs? Right? Do you know a little bit of what happens? Well, very, very quickly, all of the tendons that connect the muscles to the fingers pass through the center of your hand. And the space that they pass through, it's right in the center of your wrist, it's called a carpal tunnel. It's a very small space. It's probably about as big as the end of one of your fingers. And there are 9 tendons that pass through that tunnel. Why 9 tendons? We only have 5 fingers. Well, yeah, the 4 fingers each have 2 tendons, and the thumb has 1. Right? So there's 9 tendons that go through the tunnel. Not only do the tendons go through, but they're sheaths. They're protective sheaths fit in there, all in the space about as big as the end of your finger. And not only the tendons and their sheaths, but something called the median nerve. Right? It runs all the way from down the length of your arm to your fingers. Well, when that nerve becomes inflamed, when the tendons become inflamed and starts to swell, presses in on the median nerve. Right? And when you press in on that nerve, that's where the tingling comes from. Right? And all the nasty symptoms that we think of with carpal tunnel. So even carpal tunnel goes back to a tendon problem. So the question is, how do we avoid this? Right? And I'm going to put out a couple of hopefully common sense things. They really are common sense. It's not hard. It's a couple of common sense things, but you know, it's the common sense things we sometimes avoid and don't think about and don't do. So how to avoid injury? Wrist placement. If I could sum up how your body works when you play the piano, I would say that your body operates best when everything is working in the mid-range of motion. It's when we get into the extremes of motion that problems start to happen. So, we've been taught this, all of our pianistic lives. How do you hold the wrist of the piano? Is it high? Is it low? What is it? It's kind of level, right? Well, now think about that. The reason why that you want things to be level, now you know this about the carpal tunnel, is because if I'm playing with a really low wrist, the 2 things are happening. Number one, that space where all the tendons press through, it's a tight space is becoming tighter and more cramped. And not only that, but when I play loud, all the weight and the force and the energy that comes through my entire body, which should be transferred into the keyboard, goes right to the center of your wrist and stops there. Right? So there's a lot of stress that's being placed. If you play with a really high wrist, right, well, you're still cramping that space, that tunnel space. But the other thing that's happening is all of the weight, again, and not just weight, but the energy which should be transferred into the keyboard is going somewhere right up here and stopping. Okay? I had a teacher once say that a level wrist is like a garden hose. You know, if you have a garden hose that doesn't have a kink in it, water flows freely through it. But if there's a kink there, the flow is stopped, right? Well, all of your energy and weight and the excitement and passion and the strength that comes through your torso and your upper body doesn't need to stress against the hand. It needs to go through into the keyboard. And when you have a level wrist, you've got a free-flowing garden hose, you know, for all that energy to go through. One of the things that is overlooked when finding a level wrist, and I'm assuming we probably have some teachers in here too that have at least taught piano or maybe will teach piano one day if they're not already. One of the things that really can help you keep a level wrist is finding the right bench height. Pianists are notorious for just sitting on anything that they have. But you just have no idea how destructive, really, how destructive sitting for hours on end, weeks on end, years on end, on a bench that's not the right height, how that can mess you up. You know, let's think about it for a minute. If I'm sitting really low, right, and the keyboard is here, then in order to kind of create some sense of stability and support, what am I going to do with my wrist? I'm going to raise it, right? That way I can feel like I have something to go down. Right, and likewise, if I'm sitting on a bench that's really too high and the keyboard's down here, well, that's going to happen, right, to play that way. So the question is, and this is something I'm going to borrow from Edna Delansky and Dorothy Talbot, how do you find the correct bench height? Has nothing to do with how big you are, how tall you are. We think about all those things. It really doesn't have anything to do with it. Could I use you as a volunteer? You don't have to play a note. All you've got to do is just come sit at the piano. And I want to demonstrate maybe how we can find this. You won't have to do anything other than just sit. I'll just use the phone. And go ahead and sit there at the piano and get your arms up on the keys like you're going to play. To find the correct bench height, it's kind of a two-person job. I guess once I showed this to you, you could figure it out on your own. It's easier if you could maybe get a friend or a spouse or someone to help you out. In order to find the right bench height, the tip of your elbow, can I touch your elbow? Yeah. The tip of your elbow, which is right here, should be more or less even with the white keys, the top of the white keys. Okay? So, let me switch the bench a little bit. Okay, now, push your arms there. Now, I don't want you to move your arms. I don't want you to try to manipulate them in any way. You just let them be there. And I usually like to use some sort of firm surface that won't bend like a folder or a ruler. Is she a little high or a little low?
High.
She's a little high, right. I mean, you can see where that comes. So this bench height, if you were to sit like this for a long time, this could be injurious for you, right? And so we would need to lower the bench until we can find that spot where the tip of her elbow is level with the white keys. Oh, you're done. Yeah, you're done. Hang on. She's injured. Right. That's it. Yeah, we caused injury. You know, if you have a nice grand piano at home, which, by the way, I don't have. I don't even have a nice one in my office at school. But if you do, then you might have an artist bench. And when I say artist bench, I mean one of these guys, right? That you can adjust. And so you're able to adjust it. If you're like me, you just get the wooden bench. Fortunately, most benches never really are too high. Most of the time, they're too low. And so, in my own playing at home, I put carpet squares underneath the bench. You could put books or pillows, well, maybe, but can you imagine sitting on a bunch of books for an hour or two and it would just hurt your back and replace what could be a minor problem with a major one. So I use carpet squares, which you can get from any carpet company. You've got a level surface, 4, 5, 6 squares, just raise it up. What happens if the bench is too high? Well, you just have to saw the legs off. No, don't do that. Don't do that. There's really nothing you can do. I guess you could seriously saw the legs off, but probably a better solution would just be to replace it with, a bench that is the right height. So in your practice studio at home or at the piano where you play at church or the organ, you want to find that, wherever you spend most of your time, you want to find that correct pitch height and stick with it. It really will help. Has anyone ever talked about to you how you figure out how far away from the piano you need to sit? Okay. What do you think? What's your name, sir?
Jonathan.
John, what idea do you have? It could be the same thing as me, could be different, could be better.
The way I've been taught is usually you put your prints against the board and have a slight bend in your elbow.
Okay. Okay. Against the board and a slight bend in the elbow. Do you have something to say?
It was just your knees to the edge of the keyboard.
Okay. I want to throw out one other way that you can experiment with, which seems to work for me, and those ways work as well. You know, pianists, a lot of times, we just sit on any old bench, at any old height, at any old distance, and these things are important. I'm going to really overkill here, and I'm going to sit too close. Okay? If I sit too close to the piano, my foot right now, you'll see I'm not depressing the pedal, it's resting on top of the pedal. It's a serious pain in my calf right now, it's a serious pain in my ankle joint. I mean, it's just, it's like that. Right. Well, at the other end of the extreme, if I go too far out and I press down, that begins to also feel uncomfortable. Okay? So I had a teacher who actually, his name is David Watkins. He was a proponent of the Mattei School of Piano. Tobias Mattei is one of the pedagogues here in your list. But he said there's a spot that you can find where when you're resting, when you're up close, well, here it is. Rather the pedal is depressed, or rather your foot is resting on the pedal, it feels effortless in your calves and ankles. And when you find that, then that's the right distance from the piano for you. Not to discredit these guys and what they said, because those are valid ways too. But that's just an additional way that you can kind of experiment to find what works best. Now, wrist and forearm relationship. I think this term might have been coined by the Talbot bunch, but pianists sometimes can do something with their arms that at least Talbot and Edmund Delansky, those guys, they call twisting. Okay? And the rule, the maxim, is that you basically want to keep your forearm and your wrist in a straight line with the piano. In other words, you want to avoid doing things like that all the time. I mean, that's pretty common sense. I mean, everyone do this for me. Take your hand and shove it toward your pinky, which is finger 5. Well, that's uncomfortable, and if you held it there for 10 minutes, that'd be really uncomfortable. What you're doing, by the way, is something called ulnar deviation, right? Because the ulna bone is on the pinky side of your hand, and you're deviating toward the right, ulnar deviation. This is radial deviation, when you shove it toward the thumb, because the radius bone, right, is toward here. Well, now that's a great rule to say that you've got to keep your forearm and your hands and all this in line, but in theory, well, that's a great rule in theory, but in practice, come on. I mean, you can't, you just have to play everything like right here. If that really was the case, and we see pianists who play well and aren't injured at all, who are all over the place, right? But there's some coordination things that you can do to kind of minimize what happens when you twist, as the Talbot folks call it. Let me tell you a few things here. One thing is, I'm not even going to sit here at the piano because you can't see the angles correctly. Let's just imagine that I'm sitting at the piano right now. I'm facing the keyboard. Okay. A lot of playing happens in the middle C area. Well, right away, if I put my hands up to play in the middle C area, look how my arms are twisted. Okay. Well, one solution for that is simply to lean back a tiny bit. And when you lean back a tiny bit, it starts to straighten that twist out. Okay? Right. Now, I don't have a keyboard here, so I'm manipulating my hand. I'm straightening my twist out. But if I were holding to a chord at the piano, and you can try this when you get in front of an instrument, if I'm holding onto a chord, you can see it here. You can watch my wrist. As I lean back, it draws my arm more aligned behind if I'm playing up really high. Okay, well, this is great for the right hand, right? There's no problem. But what about this? Look at my left hand. Right? Well, again, if I lean right and slightly back, then you can see that start to straighten out just enough. Okay, to kind of help. The opposite is also true. Your right hand is going to play down here. If I lean back and slightly right, it can straighten it out. But if I just stay put, then my hand is like that. Right? That's almost like choreography, for yourself. Planning how you're going to move, when you play. There are times, however, when even that's not going to quite be enough. And so there's a wonderful book out. You don't have to write it down because it's listed in the resource part of your handout. It's a wonderful book by a guy named Thomas Mark, who is associated with a company called Andover Educators. And they're also people that are kind of trying to help musicians play in a healthy manner. They're not just all about pianists, though. They educate all musicians, no matter what the instrument. And so Andover Educators has a book out called What Every Musician Needs to Know About the Body. Well, Thomas Mark has a book out more specifically for us called What Every Pianist Needs to Know About the Body. And Thomas Mark says that a lot of times, actually, you really can twist if you don't do it with what we call a thumb-oriented motion. Okay, now, let me tell you what I mean by that. We've got the water bottle there. Hold it, don't worry, I promise I won't drink it. But hold it out to me and offer it to me, okay? Now, most of us, when we reach for a water bottle or a soda can, we do it by angling our thumb toward it. Right? Try that. Reach for an imaginary soda can and imagine really how you do it. You stick that thumb out, right? Because you're going to grasp it probably with the thumb and the second finger, and so you prepare for that by reaching out. That's thumb-oriented movement. Do that again. Reach for that imaginary soda can. Hold that thumb out, and you can feel the tension, right, that's in there, right? Can you reach for it now and not jut the thumb out? That feels a little different, right? It feels a little odd. But it makes more sense. If you're suspended and you're hanging from, what do you call it? Monkey bars or something like that. We hang on to the bar like this, not like that, right? Okay? But a lot of our activities happen with thumb-oriented movement. Well, you know what? When I go to the piano and I'm going to play an octave, a lot of times, if I'm not careful, I approach that octave like that. Right? Instead of just reaching to play the octave. Okay? So see, I can twist my hand a little bit and it doesn't actually hurt. If I just see, you can even see it visually. This is just, if this is the piano, this is allowing my hand to twist a little bit. Right, coming into a twist, but here it is with thumb ring, right? So you can choreograph away twists, or you can kind of learn to approach the instrument not jutting that thumb, right? When are some times when you might jut the thumb? Now, a lot of people do it when they play octaves, because most of us play octaves with 1 and 5, or maybe 1 and 4. Right, and so most of the time, instead of bringing 1 and 5 together to the piano as a cohesive unit, we kind of lead with our thumb. If you play the thumb on a black key, a lot of times you place it by. Those are the kind of things you want to watch out for. That's not my idea. I don't want to take credit for something that's not mine. That came from Thomas Mark, and What Every Pianist Needs to Know About the Body is a wonderful book. So I will definitely recommend that. Finger position, I probably don't have to spend a lot of time here. I guess I'm going to hit finger position 4 with co-contraction, which is number 5, because they're kind of related. We know that curling is bad, right? Everyone draw your hand up into a claw. Make a real claw. Don't just curl, but make a claw. And now then try to move those fingers while they're in a claw. Doesn't that feel nasty? Now flatten it out like you're trying to, you're going to push against the wall. Really stretch, flatten, stretch. And then while you're keeping that stretch, try to move your fingers. That's equally as uncomfortable. But now let them just kind of go somewhere in that middle range of motion. And you feel the fluidity. That's a demonstration that Edna Delansky always has all of her audiences do. Why is the claw, the overly curled fingers, and the flattened fingers, why do they feel so bad? It's something that we call co-contraction, or I think Talbot folks might call it a dual muscular pull. And the reasoning behind that, scientifically, it's pretty sound. When I open up my fingers, when I open up my hand, I'm using something called the extensor muscles. You know, the muscles that open your hand are not the same muscles that close your hand. It's two different sets. And this is called the extensor muscles. And when I close my hand, I'm using the flexors. Okay? Well, if I curl up my fingers, what muscles am I using to curl? I'm using the flexors. Overkill. Really using the flexors. But then as I lift my fingers while they're called curl, I'm using my extensors. So see, I'm using muscle groups at odds with one another. Right? That's the dual muscular pull, the co-contraction. You're using the extensors against the flexors, and it creates a tension that you don't need. Right? Okay, does that make sense? Okay? So, you know, how do we watch out for our fingers? Well, you know, we're all taught a lot of different things. You know, I remember being taught, put your hand on your head, and then I had another teacher, and that's the shape of your hand. Another teacher would say, imagine you're holding a baseball or a softball. The most natural thing for me that I tell my students and what I try to maintain myself is just the position your hands are when they're down at your side. Right? If you notice the position your hands are when they're down at your side, and you were to raise your hand up without altering the shape of your hand, that's your position. It's different for everyone. That's why I hate prescribing a formula. Imagine you're holding a softball. Because my hand's not your hand. And your hand is not the person beside you, their hand. You find the natural hand shape for you. And most people, unless you walk around, you know, town in their tents and you got, you know, like that, most people, you know, their hands are very natural when it's down at your side. So that's the position you want to strive for. Now, does that mean that your hands always have to stay there? No. When you look at fine hands, like some of the Baylor faculty here, I'm sure, and Joe Martin, if you watch him play, his hands assume a gazillion and 20 different shapes. Okay? But I guarantee you that this position, this natural position, is home base, so to speak, that he's always coming back to. Right? So this is kind of the bank that we always, the home base we come back to, and we avoid these twists or these, you know, positions for extreme lengths of time. Okay? It's common sense stuff, but if you really start to look at your playing, you'll find that a lot of these things actually you might not be doing, you know, particularly if you're hurting. Stretching. You know, I really spent more time studying with Barbara Listerstein, but it seems like in putting this lecture today, I've relied a lot on some of the Talbot thoughts. I'm going to give you one more. This is an exercise that Edna has people do, ask them to do, and it's a wonderful exercise. We know that stretching doesn't feel good, you know, at least if you do it for a long amount of time. I mean, if we have any classical pianists in here, or even people who have went through that repertoire, we've all tried to play Rachmaninoff, you know, and we know what kind of hand stretches that guy had. Of course, you know what? Maybe Rachmaninoff shouldn't have played Rachmaninoff, because apparently he had hand pain too. You know, but we've all tried and had to play music that requires the big stretches, and we know that that's uncomfortable most of the time. Let's do a stretch. Let's pretend like you're reaching a 10th or an 11th. You know, Rachmaninoff could reach an 11th. It's documented that he could. He could play from a C above the octave C all the way to the F. That's an 11th. He could play that. Of course, then again, we read about what he went through, but somehow he could do it. Well, now stretch. Really stretch. Push your thumb as far away from your fifth finger as you possibly can. And you're going to feel a band of tension. It doesn't feel good, particularly if I ask you to hold it for a long time. Okay? Now you can let your hand go. Let me show you this. This is something interesting. I want you to take your right hand and hold it up. I want to make sure we're all on the same page and my directions are clear. I'm going to ask you to do it with your right hand. Take your right hand and hold it up. And then I'm going to ask you to take your left hand. Let me do it first before you try it. And I want you to take your left hand and start to push your pinky and your thumb apart from one another as far as they can go. Now, here's the trick. The right hand doesn't do anything. It's limp. I don't want your right hand to help the left hand at all. The right hand is just limp. It's 100% the left hand that's going to be opening the right hand. The right hand is just going along for the right. It's not helping at all. Well, I can keep on pushing, right? And you can see that you can stretch your right hand just as far as it was a second ago, but if the right hand is really not doing the work and the left hand is doing it, you're not going to feel any tension. Okay? Now, do you understand? You see what I'm saying? Okay. Well, now that's interesting, because if I open my hand, there's tension, but if an outside agent rather, comes and does it, there's no tension. Wouldn't it be nice if the piano could open your hand for you? Well, obviously it can't. But here's the thing. When I play the piano and I have to play stretches, even when I don't have to play stretches, I'm imagining that the piano is opening my hand. And it's an absolute mind trick. Is the piano really opening my hand? Of course not. I mean, if I don't open my hand, I'm going to get that, right, when I'm trying to play an octave. Of course the piano is not opening your hand. But here's the trick of it. If I know I've got to play an octave, then you know what I do most of the time if I'm not careful? I want to prepare that octave before I play it. I'll do something like this. Right? And when I do that, when I create the shape of an octave, then I'm already tense. Right? But if I feel like the piano is going to open my hand, I open my hand, but I'm imagining, I'm pretending the piano is going to do it, I'll do that. And I'll still open my hand, but the trick is I don't pre-prepare. And I open my hand just at the last possible second, and the difference when I'm holding that octave, it's almost like I'm only using the necessary tension that I need to open my hand to get the job done. And this is using more tension than I need. You know, that's where pain and injury comes from. You know, every task, for a long time, pianists used to teach relax, 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 relax. You've got to relax at the piano. I hate that, because if I was really relaxed, I'd fall down on the floor. You know, and even then, as long as my heart's beating, there's some muscle that's working, so I'm not really relaxed even then. When you're dead, you'll be relaxed. Every task at the piano requires X amount of tension. Okay? So trying to relax isn't going to help you. The problem is when the task at hand requires this much tension and you're giving it that much. Right? And that's what pretending that the piano is opening my hand does. It helps me to only use the necessary amount of tension that I've got to use and no more. Right? Now, you know, all this is theoretical for you until you go to the piano and try it. So, you know, there's practice rooms upstairs, there's pianos all around. Sometime I would, you know, while this is fresh in your mind, go and try some of these things. Okay? I probably should have just asked you to be around the piano and we could try it one by one. But, you know, imagining the piano is opening your hand will help eliminate some of the tension you feel. If you feel tension, maybe you may be intuitively doing it right. But if you feel tension, pretending the piano is going to open your hand can kind of help out with that. Stretching, or key bedding is the next one. Key bedding. Do we know what key bedding is? I think it's a term maybe Matei came up with. Key bedding is when you reach the bottom of the key and you are still pushing. Okay, that's key bedding. You know, piano it's a blessing and a curse. If I sing a tone, or if I play a tone on a trumpet or an instrument other than the piano and maybe the guitar, while I'm playing that tone, I can affect its sound. I can make it louder. If I'm playing a tone on a trumpet or a trombone, I can put a little vibrato in it. I can make it softer. I can affect the sound. But you guys know that once that key is down, there's nothing I can do. I mean, it's done. I do have some choices. I can either let the sound continue to fade away until it evaporates into nothing, or I can choose to terminate the sound early by releasing the key. But once the key has been played, there's nothing I can do. I can't make that louder or softer. It's going to now begin to die out acoustically, you know, and that's it. I'm amazed at how many of my students feel like they can still affect the sound when they play a note, and they keep pushing into the key, right? You know, I'm really pushing, I'm exaggerating to show you and to make a point. Most people do it a little more subtle. It's just a tiny, tiny, tiny little amount of strength that they're putting into the bottom of the key. But if you multiply that tiny, tiny amount by weeks and weeks and months and years of practice, pretty soon you're going to have a problem. Okay? I equate it to Panama City. Has anyone ever been to Panama City? Well, you know by now I'm from Atlanta. Panama City is right there on the Gulf. We used to go there on vacation. We call it the Redneck Riviera. And that's where we go. And I love go-karts. I used to love to race go-karts. Inevitably, I would be racing with a friend or with Dad or something like that, and I'd get a dud. You know, one that's just, with 3 horsepower and the governor, it's all there. And I mean, it's just not, they don't want anyone to get hurt, so it's not going to go fast. Well, if you have a dud and you're sitting there trying to catch someone that's in front of you, by the end of the race, when I hopped out of the go-kart, I couldn't even walk. Why? Because I just got that pedal to the metal and I'm pushing, just trying to get 1 ounce of speed out of this go-kart, and it ain't going to happen. I mean, the pedal's to the metal, it's going as fast as it can go. And that's kind of, you see the analogy. That's what happens when we press. So one of the things that I do with my students, bugs the heck out of them, but I don't care, that just makes me do it more, is if they're playing a passage, I'll come up. They will never know I'm going to do it. I'll just come up and from the bottom flip their hand up. And if they're not pressing, it should come right up. And you can do this with yourself. Practice the right hand alone and just let that left hand come and tap it up. Or the other way. If they're playing something and I try to do it and I get this, then we got a problem. Right? You're pressing in more than you should. And it doesn't even, that's soft. It doesn't matter if I play loud. Right? At this point, as loud as that sound was, there was a lot of energy and weight going into the key. But I retract every bit of that except for the minute amount of pressure that I need to keep the key down. Right, there's just nothing there. I think people might keep it more when they play loud. It's just, they just want to get a little more emotion out of it, a little more strength, just kind of like me with that go-kart. So, when you play loud, you want to watch out for that. Final things, just some common sense things. Physical fitness. You would never think that being fit would help with hand injuries, but it really does, because, 2 things happen. One, and I'm not talking weights so much, I'm talking more cardio. If you get that blood going, the blood comes in and out, and it lubricates and cleans, and, it helps get rid of inflammation. But then at the very least, it helps with performance anxiety. I don't know about you and maybe other pianists that are going through college, but I love playing, but I'm a nervous performer. I really do get nervous. And I guess everyone does. It's something that I never really quite get over. I always would, the first 10 minutes of a concert when I was playing a lot of concerts would just be torture for me. But then I would settle in and I could kind of start enjoying it. But those first 10 minutes, just shoot me, please, please. Well, when we play, our heart rate increases when we're nervous, right? It's going faster. Well, the better shape you're in, the quicker that heart's going to regulate. And come back to normal, and you can get over those jitters and get over the music making. So, at the very least, staying fit will help you battle performance anxiety. What to do, or why, rather, this is D, why many injured pianists never recover. Don't you just feel like if I had an injury for 10 years, if you're hurting, maybe it's one that you've had for a while, or maybe you know someone that played and 20 years ago they hurt themselves and they're still going around in a cast. The reason why a lot of pianists, they take pills, they ice their hand, they bandage their hand, they do surgery, which is kind of the last resort, but yet they still hurt. Well, it's just because they keep doing the same things that cause the injury. You can have that carpal tunnel surgery, and the pain might go away for a while, but if you go back to the piano and do the same things that caused the injury in the first place, it's going to come back. And then what are you going to do? You've already had the highest level of treatment, the surgery. They can't do a second surgery on a surgery. Well, I don't know, maybe they can today. But the reason why people still hurt is they don't address the cause of the injuries, in the first place. What to do if an injury occurs. I want to read this very quickly. I have stages of overuse. You probably see that there. Gail Berenson, who's a wonderful piano teacher, wonderful pedagogue, you probably won't be able to write all these down, but maybe if you could sum up each one of these stages. She's identified 4 stages of injury. Stage 1 is discomfort during or after the activity, but no performance disability. In other words, you might be a little sore, but it's not hampering you as you play. This would be analogous to post-exercise muscle soreness. The pain is usually in one side. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is there's discomfort during and after the activity. So after you're done playing, it still kind of lingers a little bit. But there's still no performance disability. You're not to the point yet where it's hampering what you're doing. The pain lasts for only a short period after the activity, but it can be felt in multiple sites. When you press on the spot of your hand, maybe some tenderness is there. Stage 3 is discomfort during and after the activity, and there is performance disability. This is where the pain that you're experiencing, if you are experiencing pain, is starting to kind of affect you now as you play. You're not playing as best you could. The pain might last for a period longer than 2 hours after the activity and will be present when your hand is resting, or I say hand, when you're at resting, whatever part of your body is hurting. And during other activities, and then stage 4, this is where I was. Discomfort that is incapacitating due to continuous pain, weakness, and inability to coordinate. Well, Berenson recommends that if you feel like you're in stage 3 or higher, you need to go see a doctor. It's time for medical attention. Some questions, all right, that you might want to jot down that can help you or your students. These are also from Gail Berenson. That might help you isolate the pain and the problem of the pain. Do you think your injury is due to a non-playing related activity? Or do you think it is related to playing? I used to play tennis a ton, and I'm not so sure that my tennis playing didn't contribute to my pain in the piano. I don't think it was the only factor, but I think you coupled that with doing some things at the piano wrong, and it was a recipe for trouble. You know, I never picked up